AI is triggering a fundamental shift in the software development process.
Instead of being in the IDE and actually looking directly at the code yourself, you are talking to an agent or sometimes multiple agents doing the coding for you.
What does the next generation of software teams look like? I talked with Camille, VP of Engineering at CoreWeave, to get her insights.
There's a whole pipeline from idea to code to validation and testing to, release to support.
Yeah.
And I think we've all really gone deep into the generating code part of that. The rest of that pipeline, we're just going to hit all the bottlenecks everywhere else.
Whether you're a CIO, VP of software development, or a developer, you will find this exploration insightful and enlightening. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Season 2 of the AI Cloud Essentials, a podcast series brought to you by CoreWeave. Today, we are talking about the autonomous engineering frontier, and I'm super excited to be joined by Camille. So, Camille, welcome.
Thank you.
In the past couple of years, we have seen a lot of advancements into how the developer's role and the developer's life is completely transformed. I would love to get your take on your personal journey and what you're seeing in the industry.
Yeah, sure. So, it's been a very interesting few years, as you said. I think that 2.5 years ago, right, we were sort of starting to see a little bit of traction with Copilot and, some of the tools where you would be in your IDE or, and it would sort of suggest code for you. You could get a little bit more than your normal autocomplete kind of activity from the AI. And that was definitely a benefit, and lots of teams use that. Lots of teams have been using that. But things started to really change about, last November-ish, and certainly even really early this year, right? Just very quickly, as more and more people have realized the power of that sort of agentic coding, where instead of being in the IDE and actually looking directly at the code yourself, you are talking to an agent or sometimes multiple agents doing the coding for you, and you are giving them various types of instructions in order to actually generate the code without you really necessarily looking at the code in context yourself. And that is a huge change that I think is really rocking the tech industry right now. As people try to figure out, how in the world do I adapt to this? What does this mean? What does this mean for me as a developer? What does this mean for me as a product manager? What does this mean for me as a marketing person? Here at CoreWeave, we're actually doing a hack week this week. And it is amazing to see. I happen to, lead the developer experience team here. So I have sort of access to the stats of what kind of, people using these AI coding tools. And it is remarkable how many people not in engineering are using them to play around, to do things for their job in marketing or revenue or, HR, recruiting, right? People are really, non-coders are definitely getting into the game, and it's definitely a very interesting time.
Yeah, I can completely relate with it because I started my career as a developer, and I remember, all the boilerplate text and all the conundrums that we had to do. So GitHub Copilot itself was interesting. But now, looking into all the agents, I've now started my own company, and I have gotten back to my engineering roots and doing the development. And you are so spot on, like in terms of talking about how you could actually see an agent do the things for you. And I'm experiencing it firsthand. So I'm super excited to talk to you further on this. How do you see the use cases and scenarios that are being evolved, right? As you said, people were using it first just for code completion, but now helping it reason and plan and write the entire code.
Yeah.
So could you talk about a couple of use cases and scenarios, whether internal or external, that you're seeing?
Yeah, I would say that still in, most companies that maybe aren't like, I don't know, Anthropic, where they say they're not writing any code at all by hand, which, may very well be true for them. But I think most companies that are still trying to figure out how to adopt this, people definitely see a huge amount of value in using it both for like kind of new things. So greenfield, as we call it, right? And engineering. So you have a new idea, you have a brand new project starting from that agentic, letting the agent really do all of the like work itself from the jump. Or in a lot of cases, people are also using it for kind of like the side work that you might not normally have bothered to do. But that's so easy to get generated from the agents that now it's like, actually, like, I can make this like weird sort of testing setup that, because Claude can just kind of write it for me, or Cursor can kind of generate it for me, or whatever, whatever I'm using. And I don't have to remember how to use that particular library and this other weird tool. And it's okay if it isn't perfect, because it's not like something I'm putting into production. It's just a tool to help me do the parts of my job faster. So I feel like we see a lot of that adoption, and then a lot of greenfield adoption. And slowly people are trying to work it into how to actually use this for my pre-existing code bases. That's still, I think, the area where everyone's doing a lot more work to figure it out.
I see a lot of people doing some migration of their legacy code into the new code. I know Cursor is one of your customer. I've been reading about them. And I also seen that people are using it, as you said, for the greenfield opportunities. Like, I love to use it for doing some mockups, right? If I have to do some mockups to get some inspiration, and then I might write the whole code myself. So internally, how are you folks using it at CoreWeave? How is your own developers and your own internal customers?
It is a breadth of usages, right? So definitely lots of greenfield, right? We have a lot of new initiatives that have kicked off very, very quickly because the people, the engineers working on those initiatives are very comfortable working in this multi-agent environment and throwing a bunch of things at it. One of the most interesting things here, so our CTO is the biggest spender on AI tools here, which, and I actually discovered this yesterday, and I asked him, hey, Peter, like, what are you doing? And he's like, well, he's using it a huge amount for operational automation, understanding what's going on, making better and better dashboards and correlations, because a lot of what we do here at CoreWeave, obviously, is we support these massively complex AI data centers and, this very complex AI cloud, right? And a lot of that work is, having really deep awareness of what's going on and sort of why something is failing and detecting it before our customers detect it so that we can get on it and fix it and make sure it doesn't, it doesn't affect their training workloads or their inference workloads, right? And, Peter has always been incredibly hands-on when it comes to, detecting and fixing problems, frankly, throughout our customers. I mean, anybody who's a customer of CoreWeave knows Peter. And so he's just making incredibly valuable use of these tools to help him do that part of his job and, to get more sleep and, to help all the rest of us who do those kinds of activities from time to time or all the time, also answer those questions. And so I think that's a really, that is really interesting to me, is where I'm seeing it not for the thing that everybody thinks about, which is like writing new code and building new features, but actually like, just like thinking about your job and how you gather information and how you answer questions and how these tools can build automation and build dashboards and build support for you to do that even better.
Yeah, it's such an interesting example, as you said, right? Because if you start from what your pain points are currently, not just the greenfield, which is exciting, and how you could do it better and how you could actually enhance it, where do you see where we are heading in terms in the future? I mean, the pace of innovation has been outright insane, right? I mean, so where do you see? What do you predict for 2026, the later half of 2026?
Oh my gosh. People love to ask me for predictions, and I always tell them, I'm not a futurist. Like, look, the pace of change is very rapid. And I think one of the reasons that the overall world as a whole has still sort of struggled to make the most use of AI is because it keeps changing so quickly. And it's really hard to figure out how to adopt something that a month later you have to completely change the way you're using it to get the most value out of it. And so I think that we are not yet done with that particular treadmill. But I also, look, I definitely think no matter what, right, everybody is seeing the value in these coding agents. It's just, it's undeniable. I'm not saying that it solves every coding problem. I know plenty of people who regularly apply it to their code bases and they're like, it's just not ready for this complexity, this gigantic, super complex odd language code base, what have you, right? But for a lot of things that people do, they are, in the engineering space, I think they are figuring out how to get value from it. Now, as a person who, among other things, runs a developer experience team, one of the challenges is, of course, writing code is not the only thing that we do. There's a whole pipeline from idea to code to validation and testing to, release to support.
Yeah.
And I think we've all really gone deep into the generating code part of that. The rest of that pipeline, we're just going to hit all the bottlenecks everywhere else, right? A lot of people are talking about code review as a big bottleneck right now, right? So when you've got, when you spend, so I was talking to a friend who almost entirely just writes code through agents. And I was like, what is okay, so if you barely ever touch the code yourself, like, what does it look like? He's like, well, we spend whatever, like a month, like banging away on this design and like, sort of proposal spec that we want to do. So me and other engineers are really talking about what do we want to do? Okay. Then we give it to the agent and whatever, breakdown they have. And the agent spends like 30 hours or however long chugging away at it. Yeah. And then, it's like, and now I've got a stack of pull requests and I'm babysitting those through kind of the review and validation process. Yeah. And, on the one hand, he's like, and it's like, this is interesting for me because like, it's like as an engineer, some of the fun part of being an engineer is actually writing the code, and there's none of that in there, right? It's all the kind of like, dealing with your coworkers, trying to figure out the design, and then dealing with your coworkers trying to get the pull requests approved. Yeah. But it is interesting to see, like, okay, if he's in a situation where he's really managed to get away from that writing of the code entirely, now it's like, okay, well, we've got the rest of these steps. What does that look like? And this is just a first pass of optimization. So, okay, now that we've got, the agent writing all these stack pull requests, can we use the agent to actually help with the pull requests? What are we reviewing really? Yeah. Are we really expecting the engineers to really review the code that they didn't write? Yeah. Or are we expecting them to review the spec and review the testing and review the support plan, right? I think these are all questions that we are going to be answering and trying and failing at and trying and succeeding at in both ways throughout certainly the rest of the year. I would guess the next several years, to be honest with you. As things change, we're going to continuously have to be changing our workflows and really identifying those bottlenecks and optimizing for them.
What are the early lessons learned based on all the code that has been written by an agent? The concerns are, I mean, of course, people, when you're using it in your own internal setup, you might be able to kind of provide it to your existing code, your existing style of writing and all. So what are the lessons and takeaways from that aspect? And as you said, code review, the code that has not been written by them, but at the same time, if it has picked up some of their nuances and best practices and how they can actually do it better.
I think that's, so much of the concerns and challenges and issues right now are really just about like the humans and how they interact with one another with regards to this stuff. So like, definitely everyone I know has had the experience of someone on the team went a little too wild, generated a whole bunch of code that they themselves didn't really review very carefully, and then threw it over the fence to their colleagues to say, review this. And their colleagues are like, I'm looking at this and it's clearly slop, or it's not, it seems like it makes sense, but then I have to like peel it apart. And I'm just like, wait, what? What does this do? What does that do? And I feel like you're giving me a lot of work because you didn't really think about what was produced that carefully. You were just like, I produced a bunch and you guys go now have to read it. I think that is a lesson that it's interesting. I think we've all learned it, but not all of us know how to approach it. I have friends that are talking about, they have early career developers, right, on their teams. And they're like, look, some of them are very careful and they're really trying to do the work and they're not even always generating. They're actually sometimes writing it by hand to really make sure they understand. And that's going fine, right? They're doing great. They're learning. They're very, very productive. And then some of them are very clearly using a lot of AI, and that's fine, except that when we come in and give them feedback about this isn't that good and you need to redo it, they're like, why should I do that? The AI is just going to support it. The AI is just going to write the next one. And, nobody's quite comfortable with that yet, is my feeling, right? Like, I think that, in reality, especially when it comes to more early career engineers who are trying to make the most use out of this, as they should.
Yeah.
I think, people who don't want to listen to their colleagues saying, hey, like, no, we can't, especially with certain types of systems. And I'm working on a database. I'm working on an operating system, working on something that's really foundational to the way a lot of people work. We actually have to have higher standards for what good looks like. This isn't a toy web app that, 3 people are going to use and doesn't really matter, right? So I think that a lot of it really is just still the interpersonal. It's the how do teams work together once this content is generated, and make sure that they're not setting themselves up for later challenges and failures.
Great. I think as you were talking about this whole, context, I was thinking about it. What we've seen so far, in my humble opinion, is that it's very good in sometimes, creating some one piece of module or something, but it's not very good in a holistic, systematic design or a whole system design. So I think a lot of advancements need to be there as well. But this is fantastic conversation, Camille. I'm sure our viewers learned a lot. What will be your parting advice to anyone who's listening to us today?
My parting advice is always, keep learning and stay open-minded, and accept that you are going to do some not quite throwaway work, but you're going to do some like iterations right now, right? If you can't just ignore what's going on and wait for it to settle, because it's going to take a while to settle. So you do need to be keeping up and learning and trying to figure it out, and just be comfortable with the fact that, like, the way you approach getting value from these tools today, it may change in a month, and that will be a little bit annoying because you're going to have to like change it up and to meet the new the new styles. But this is also kind of exciting, right? And I think everyone I know who is open-minded, you don't have to be open-minded and like totally like bought in that it is the way the world will be for all things, right? You can be open-minded and skeptical, but open-mindedness is so important right now when it comes to learning how to use these tools, getting the best out of them. Take the best and leave the rest, but you've got to keep looking regularly because they change so quickly that something that they couldn't do 3 months ago, they may be able to do for you today. And, that hopefully over time will allow you to focus more on the things that are fun and get rid of some of the grunt work and tedious work for yourself. And, I am cautiously optimistic that is the direction we can make this all go if we really put our minds to it.
Awesome. Very nice advice. Couldn't agree more. One cannot sit on the fence, but I has to go with the flow, but also be cautious and be, pragmatic about what really works and what doesn't work. Thank you so much, Camille. It was such a pleasure to have you with us in this episode. And thank you, everyone, all our viewers who are listening to us, and stay tuned. We are coming up with more episodes.
Thank you.